Hi there, welcome to this video tutorial where we learn about the basic features of a sound synthesizer. In this video we are going to cover the topics of waveforms, filters, volume envelopes, filter and pitch envelopes, as well as low frequency oscillators and note glide. By the end of this video you should be able to start shaping simple sounds, so let's get right to it. Waveforms relate to sound synthesis in the same way that clay relates to sculpting. It is the raw medium that we will manipulate to create our sound. There are three basic waveforms that make up the majority of sounds used in synthesis: the sine wave, the square wave, and the saw wave. The sine wave is one single instance of a sound wave. Because of this, it has only one frequency, called the fundamental frequency. The saw and square are much different. They have frequencies across the entire spectrum of audible sound. This is because they are built using many instances of sine waves. A sine, square, or saw playing a note of 440 Hz will all have the fundamental frequency of 440 Hz. But in addition to that, the saw and square wave will have additional sine waves at frequencies that are exact multiples of the fundamental frequency, called overtones. So if I'm telling you that square waves and saw waves are just a bunch of sine waves, why are they called square and saw waves? This is because when you sum together the fundamental frequency along with its overtones, you get a single wave shaped like a saw or square, respectively. This topic can quickly get beyond the scope of introductory sound synthesis, so if you like to look further into it, I highly recommend investigating the topics of Fourier series as well as overtones. But the most important thing to understand is that a sine wave has sound at only one frequency, whereas a saw and square have many frequencies. In practice, the sine wave is most commonly used for sub-bass instruments, as well as drum synthesis. Saw and square waves are used to synthesize the majority of other sounds and instruments. This is because of their additional frequency content, which is much more similar to the majority of instruments and sounds that we hear. Let's have a listen to these three waveforms. Like we previously discussed, most waveforms have energy across many frequencies. Controlling and modulating these frequencies is one of the most important aspects of sound synthesis. To do this, we use filters, which can remove certain frequencies. This is referred to as subtractive synthesis, since we are subtracting certain frequencies. Filters are one of the tools we use to sculpt our waveforms into the sound we want. Let's start working with the saw wave, and then start applying different filters to it to see how we can change the sound. All synthesizers incorporate built-in filters, but we are going to use an external one because of the nice visualization it provides us with. There are three primary types of filters used in sound synthesis, these being the low pass, the high pass, and the band pass. All of these filters utilize a cutoff point, or the point where the frequencies will begin being reduced. In addition to cutoff, all filters will have a resonance control, which will give a boost to the frequencies around the cutoff point. Let's start by looking at the low pass. The low-pass filter will remove any frequencies above the cutoff point, while letting the lower frequencies through, hence the name, low-pass. The high-pass filter is the exact opposite. It allows high frequencies to pass while removing any frequencies below the cutoff. Finally, we have the bandpass filter, which allows only a band of sound frequencies through, removing both frequencies above and below the band. Another way in which we can shape a sound is through the use of a volume envelope. One of the primary ways in which the human mind interprets and identifies a certain instrument is through perceiving the attack and tail of the sound. A guitar pluck reaches full volume upon the beginning of the note, followed by a sharp decline. In contrast, an instrument like a cello or oboe sounds softer because the volume increases and decreases in a more gradual manner. Because of this, when synthesizing sound, volume envelope is very important. The type of volume envelope utilized in a large majority of synthesizers is called the ADSR envelope. This stands for attack, decay, sustain, and release. Each one of these terms refers to a different section in the volume envelope, and the time it takes for it to pass in relation to the key input on your synthesizer. As you can see, in this synthesizer, we have 4 knobs corresponding to each one of those parameters. The attack time is how long the sound takes to go from 0 volume to maximum from the point the key is depressed. The decay time is the time it takes for the sound volume to decrease from the end of the attack time down to the volume level specified by the sustain. The sustain is different from the attack and decay because it is not a period of time, but rather a volume value. The sustain denotes the volume that the sound will be held at from the end of the decay till the time that the key input is released. The release is the time it takes for the sound to decrease from the sustain level to 0 after the key input has been released. Filter and pitch envelopes are very similar to a volume envelope. They have the same attack, decay, sustain, and release parameters, but where in a volume envelope, the value being modified is the volume of the sound. In the other two, it is the filter cutoff and pitch of the sound, respectively. In a filter envelope, you'll be presented with the same knobs as a volume envelope. Though in a filter envelope, the attack will control how fast the cutoff point moves up, the decay controls how long it takes for the cutoff point to move down to the sustain point, and the release how long it takes for the filter cutoff to move back to the original position. The pitch envelope is the exact same, but it controls the pitch of the sound being generated. With a filter envelope, you will have a parameter referred to as envelope, which controls the degree to which the envelope will affect the filter. A higher envelope value means the filter cutoff will be influenced more. In a pitch envelope, you will have a parameter by the same name, but this controls the amount of notes up or down that the pitch will be modified by. Let's modify the attack of this filter envelope and see how it will affect the low-pass filter. The cutoff should slowly rise. Now let's modify the attack of this pitch envelope. The pitch of the sound should start low and then rise. The low-frequency oscillator is a very handy feature used to automate the movement of different elements in a synthesizer. A low-frequency oscillator is a signal that oscillates at a low subsonic frequency. It is most commonly referred to as an LFO. In most synthesizers, an LFO can be used to modulate many different things, but most often it is used to modulate the position of the filter cutoff. The parameters of an LFO include the rate, which controls the speed of the oscillation, and amount, which controls the degree to which the LFO modulates the filter. Let's route an LFO to control a low-pass filter and then play around with the rate and amount settings. Note glide controls how the synthesizer will transition from one note to the next. With no glide on, the note transition will be completely abrupt. With glide on, the transition between the two notes will be a continuous blend. The transition is controlled by the glide time. The longer the glide time, the longer it will take for the pitch to shift from one note to the other. So far in this video, we've covered basic waveforms, filters, volume, pitch, and filter envelopes, as well as LFOs and note glide. Now let's take what we've learned and apply it. I've arranged a short song for the purpose of this video. All the synthetic instruments in it have been created using only the functions we've discussed in this video. First, we have the kick drum. To make it, I've used a sine wave. I have then modified the parameters of the volume envelope, turning all of them down with the exception of the decay, which is at 1.3 seconds. I have then applied a pitch envelope to mimic the frequency pattern of a kick drum. For my bass instrument, I have used a square wave. Then applied a low-pass filter to it. To add some life to the bass line, I've added a saw wave. Then applied a filter envelope to a high-pass filter with an attack time of 1.5 seconds. Next, I have a square wave playing some chords. I then applied a high-pass filter to it as well as a low-pass filter. It now sounds similar to an organ instrument. For my intro melody, I have a simple sine wave. I've then increased the attack time of the volume envelope to 35 milliseconds and the release to 1.4 seconds, as well as turning on note glide with a time of 80 milliseconds. This will give us a nice whistle sound. Finally, I have my lead synth. For this, I used a saw wave. I applied a high-pass filter around 1.45 kHz, as well as a pitch envelope. Now let's hear how all of this sounds together.